Your education destroyed your brain. Not metaphorically, not partially, literally destroyed the thinking abilities you were born with. I know this because I watched it happen. I watched it happen to my classmates, to my colleagues, to the brightest students in the finest universities in the world. And I watched the system nearly do it to me. Munich, 1894. I was 15 years old. I walked out of the Luitpold Gymnasium and did not go back. Not because I had failed, because I refused to become what that school was building. My teachers had a word for me: disruptive. My Greek teacher looked me in the eye and told me directly, "You will never amount to anything." The school wanted students who memorized, recited, obeyed. I wanted to understand how the universe actually worked. These were not compatible goals, and so I left. What I want to tell you today, what I wish someone had told you before the system finished its work on you, is that what happened to me in that school is what happened to you. The building you sat in was different. The teachers had different names, but the mechanism was identical. You spent 12 years in school, 4 more in college, perhaps additional years in graduate programs, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of dollars. And here is what you cannot do. Look at a real problem in your own field and make a clear prediction before you consult the answer. Trace a claim back to an observation instead of a reputation. Follow a question past the point where there is no grade, no rubric, and no one to impress. This is not your fault. Your brain worked perfectly before they got to it. The mechanism that destroyed your thinking is not mysterious. I documented it across a lifetime of watching educated people think, or rather, watching them perform the appearance of thinking. And once you see it, you will understand why you struggle, and why it was never your intelligence. It was their method. The lie you were sold: education teaches you how to think. The truth I spent my life trying to expose: education trains you to stop thinking and start performing. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. Before school, children ask why constantly. They explore, they test, they question authority naturally. A 5-year-old hears a claim and immediately wants to see how you know. Tell them something is true because an adult said so, and they remain suspicious. Then education begins. By university, those same humans sit silently in lecture halls. They write down what authorities tell them. They never question whether any of it connects to reality. They optimize for grades, not understanding. They learn the single most important lesson that education actually teaches, and it is never written in any curriculum: compliance masquerading as intelligence. This is not maturity. This is brain damage. And I am not speaking loosely. I partially escaped it, though not without a cost the system made sure I paid. At the ETH Zurich, Switzerland's finest technical university, I regularly skipped my professor's lectures. Not from laziness. I had already concluded they were not teaching me to understand physics. They were teaching me to obey it. They wanted me to memorize the approved answers and repeat them back on command. I refused to play the game. I engaged with the material on my own terms, and only borrowed a classmate's notes when the rigid structure of an examination forced me to comply. My professor Heinrich Weber, a man I had initially admired greatly, grew so frustrated with my refusal to simply absorb and reproduce what he said that when I graduated, he refused to write me a recommendation letter. That refusal cost me everything, for a time. Every academic position I applied for, I was rejected. While my classmates, those with perfect attendance and glowing endorsements, moved into university posts, I spent years without work, tutoring children for money, searching for any employment at all. I eventually found a position as a clerk at the patent office in Bern, the lowest rung of intellectual life, stamping other people's inventions 8 hours a day. And it was there, in that small office, exiled from every university, laboratory, and credentialed expert, that I produced in a single year the work that rewrote physics entirely. Not despite being rejected by the system, because of it. While my classmates were busy writing safe papers to please their professors, I was entirely free. I had no academic reputation to protect, no syllabus to follow, no authority figure to obey. The isolation that the system intended as a punishment became an absolute sanctuary for my mind. My classmates optimized for approval. I was forced to rely purely on reality. And reality, it turns out, is far more powerful than any institution. But what I want to explain to you is not just my story. I want to explain the specific mechanisms, 3 of them, that the system used to destroy your thinking. Because once you see them clearly, you cannot unsee them. And once you cannot unsee them, you can begin to reverse the damage. The first mechanism. I want you to think back to when you were a child, before school had fully done its work. When I was very young, someone put a simple compass in my hand, a needle, a bit of metal, and yet it moved with purpose, as if an invisible hand inside the world were pulling it. No teacher assigned me that wonder, no examination rewarded it, but it haunted me. At 12 years old, I obtained an algebra textbook and worked through the entire thing on my own. Nobody assigned it. Nobody would test me on it. There was no grade, no certificate, no reward of any kind. I did it because I could not stop. Because the questions it opened were more interesting than anything happening around me. By 14, I had taught myself differential and integral calculus, from library books, in my spare time, for no reason except that I had to know. And then, as a teenager, I became obsessed with a small, concrete problem that the classroom never treated as dangerous. Move a magnet toward a coil of wire, and a current appears. Move the coil toward the magnet, and a current appears. The experiment is the same. The effect is the same. And yet the textbooks describe them as if they were fundamentally different events. Different causes, different stories, different explanations. Which one is really moving? Which one is really producing the electricity? That is not a question about symbols. That is a question about reality. I held that asymmetry in my mind for years. Not because I was trying to be clever, because I could not accept a description of nature that depended on the viewpoint of the lecturer. That stubborn attachment to a real phenomenon, a needle turning, a current appearing, the world behaving the same way no matter which object you call at rest, is what later made the rest possible. My teachers at the gymnasium had no idea any of this was happening. They saw only a disruptive boy who refused to perform on their terms. What they could not see was a mind doing what minds do naturally when performance pressure is removed, following genuine curiosity wherever it leads, connecting ideas to real phenomena, building understanding from the ground up. This is what education took from you. I call it reality disconnection. Every time a teacher rewarded you for reciting the correct answer without requiring you to demonstrate that you understood it, they trained you to sever knowledge from reality. Every time they tested memorization instead of application, they destroyed a little more of your ability to connect what you knew to what actually happens in the world. Every time you received a high mark for writing what the textbook said, instead of for predicting what would occur in a real situation, they reinforced the pattern. Symbols matter. Reality doesn't. That is why school can make you feel intelligent while leaving you helpless. In the classroom, the question is clean. The variables are named, and someone already knows the answer. In real life, the problem is messy. The variables hide, and there is no rubric. You were trained for the classroom. Reality is not multiple choice. This is why you can finish a course, repeat all the right definitions, and still freeze the moment the situation changes even slightly. Reality does not hand you problems in the same font and order as the homework set. The world does not label the variables for you. This is why you can collect certifications and still feel incompetent. You pass the test by recognizing the right symbols. You never demonstrated you could apply the concept when reality refuses to present those symbols in the approved sequence. The certification proves you can comply. It proves nothing about understanding. This is why you can speak the language of your field and still feel strangely helpless when you face something new. You learned the professional dialect, the signals insiders use to recognize each other. You never learned to anchor those signals to phenomena you can actually observe. You can perform the ritual. You cannot steer reality with it. The repair is this. After reading anything, close the book and force the idea to make contact with the world. Write down 3 predictions. 1 that should be obviously true if the concept is real. 1 that would be embarrassing if it turned out false. And 1 you could test with your own eyes in your own life this week. Then test 1. This is not philosophy. This is how you reconnect knowledge to reality. Test number 1, the prediction test. If you cannot state what you expect to happen before you look up the answer, you do not yet understand. You only recognize symbols. The second mechanism. When I arrived in America in 1933, 54 years old, the most famous scientist alive, I settled at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. The institution had been created in part to house me, an extraordinary gesture. I was genuinely grateful. And almost immediately I noticed something that disturbed me. The American academic world had produced a generation of extraordinarily credentialed scientists. Degrees from the greatest universities, publications in the most prestigious journals, endorsements from the most respected names in every field. They spoke with total authority on their subjects, and they could not tolerate having their conclusions questioned. I tried to engage young physicists in genuine debate, not to win, but to probe assumptions, to test foundations, to see where the thinking might break down. I was met with a hostility I had not expected. The credentials had become the argument itself. The authority of the institution had replaced the authority of the evidence. To question a published conclusion was to question the entire apparatus that gave it weight. I had spent my entire career doing the opposite. When I developed special relativity, I did not build on authority. I identified principles I could check against experience and demanded that everything else follow coherently. When general relativity predicted that gravity would bend light, I did not ask anyone to trust me. I proposed a specific, testable prediction. Starlight passing near the sun would be measurably deflected, and this deflection would be visible during a solar eclipse. I invited verification. I demanded it, not because I was humble, but because I understood that an idea that cannot be checked is not science. It is belief. The 1919 expedition confirmed the prediction, not because I was a prestigious authority, because the evidence verified independently. That is not how they educated you. Every time a teacher told you, research shows, without teaching you to examine how the conclusion was reached, They trained you to worship credentials instead of evidence. Every time they penalized you for questioning what the textbook said, they trained you that verification is disrespectful. Every time they rewarded you for citing authorities instead of testing claims, they destroyed another piece of your ability to think independently. By graduation, you had learned perfectly. Check the credentials, trust the experts, verify nothing. And this is why you believe advice from people with impressive titles without testing whether it actually produces results when you apply it. The credential check is complete. Whether the advice works, you were never trained to ask. This is why you accept conclusions from prestigious institutions without examining whether the methodology was sound. Verification, you were taught, is someone else's job, the job of other experts, not yours. This is why you say experts say in arguments instead of I checked and found. Citing authority was what won you marks. Checking for yourself was what got you in trouble. My method. When someone cites authority, ask for the chain of evidence. Ask what was measured. Ask what would count as a failure. Ask what observation would force the conclusion to change. I spent years of my intellectual life challenging Newton, not from arrogance. Newton was the supreme authority of physics, unchallenged for 2 centuries. Every physicist alive had built their entire understanding on his foundations. To question Newton was to question the institution of physics itself. I questioned the evidence. The evidence showed his framework broke down at extreme velocities. I did not need permission to look. Neither do you. Test number 2. The Disconfirming Evidence Test. When you believe a claim, write down what would change your mind. If the honest answer is nothing, that is not knowledge, that is loyalty. The third mechanism. In 1895, I failed my university entrance exam. I was 17. The exam tested subjects I had not formally studied. I scored brilliantly in mathematics and physics, and failed the language and botany sections. I was denied admission to ETH Zurich. The admissions committee saw a failed applicant, a student who had not prepared properly, someone to be processed and rejected. What they did not see, I had already taught myself university-level mathematics on my own. I had been wrestling with real questions that no entrance examination is designed to detect. I spent a year at a small school in Aarau while preparing to retake the exam. This school had an unusual philosophy. Students were encouraged to visualize concepts concretely, to question what they were told, to understand rather than recite. The teachers seemed genuinely interested in whether you understood, not just whether you performed correctly. I later said that year was the most intellectually alive period of my entire education. I passed the entrance exam the following year and entered ETH Zurich. And almost immediately, the contrast was obvious. At Aarau, exploration had been welcomed. At ETH, performance was everything. Professors lectured, students copied. Tests measured reproduction. Speed and accuracy in producing approved answers were the measure of a good mind. My professors found me maddening. I asked too many questions. I wanted to understand why a formula worked, not just how to apply it. I wanted to explore alternative approaches, not because the standard method was wrong, but because I had learned that exploring alternatives is the only way to know whether you truly understand a principle or whether you have merely memorized a procedure. They are not the same thing. And education is extraordinarily successful at making you unable to tell the difference. My Professor Weber eventually told me directly, "You are clever, but you have one serious failing. You will not let anyone tell you anything." He meant it as a criticism. I have thought about it ever since as the most accurate description of whatever it is I manage to preserve. This is what the system takes from you. I call it curiosity replacement. Education systematically replaces your natural exploratory curiosity with goal-directed compliance. The shift in motivation seems small. The damage to your cognitive capability is catastrophic. Every time they rewarded you for producing the approved answer instead of exploring the problem deeply, they trained you to optimize for evaluation rather than understanding. Every time they made you feel foolish for asking a basic question, they trained you to stop asking at all. Every time they taught you that curiosity is a distraction from what matters, they trained you to confuse obedience with intelligence. Children explore because they are curious. Students study because they need the grade. That shift sounds normal. It is actually the moment the damage begins. My year of 1905, the 4 papers that changed physics, did not come from a man protecting an academic reputation or pursuing a prestigious publication. It came from a man sitting in a patent office who had spent years following questions he simply could not stop asking. I had no position to protect, no approval to seek, no committee to satisfy, just questions. And the freedom, forced on me by the system's rejection, to follow them wherever they led. And this is why you struggle with things you cannot quite name. Every time you begin learning something new, and your first question is, will this be graded? Will this be useful? Will this be rewarded? That is the broken machinery education installed. Curiosity does not ask for permission, it asks for truth. But you were trained to optimize for the external signal, the mark, the credential, the approval, not for genuine understanding. Every time you silence a question because it would slow the class down, or make you look ignorant, or take you off the syllabus, you are watching the trained patterns override the natural ones. You were taught that asking too much is childish, that wandering is laziness, that not knowing immediately is shameful. 5-year-olds do not think this way. They ask until they understand. They do not protect an image. They do not manage a reputation. They do not fear the teacher's face. Then school begins, and within a few years, that same person will only ask what is safe to ask. The repair feels almost embarrassing given how deeply it has been trained out of you. But it is simple. Make a list of questions you want to ask but do not, because they might expose you, because they might sound naive, because you were trained to believe that needing clarification is weakness. Pick one question from that list and ask it anyway, out loud, in public, in writing. Somewhere it counts. The point is not the answer. The point is to restore the part of you that does not need permission to think. Test number 3, the permission test. If you only ask questions you already know how to answer, you are not learning. You are performing. When you combine all 3 mechanisms, reality disconnection, verification abdication, and curiosity replacement, you get what educational institutions proudly call a graduate. Disconnected from reality, can recite definitions but cannot navigate a new situation without an answer key. Worshipping authority, can cite experts but cannot examine evidence independently. Optimizing for compliance, can reproduce approved answers but cannot generate original thought. This is what your degree certified. Not that you can think, that you can perform. Not that you understand, that you can obey. Not that you can create anything new, that you can accurately reproduce what already exists. And this explains everything you could not account for in yourself after graduation. Why you collapse the moment the problem is phrased differently. You were trained to recognize patterns in worksheets, not patterns in reality. When the symbols change, your confidence disappears because the understanding was never there. Why you have credentials but no confidence. You were trained to perform for evaluators, not to verify for yourself. You do not actually know whether you understand because you were never taught how to check. You were only taught how to look correct. Why you can recognize excellent work but cannot produce it yourself. You were trained to identify what authorities approve, not to build from principles. Recognition and creation are entirely different cognitive activities. Education developed one and neglected the other almost entirely. Why you feel despite everything, despite the degrees and the years and the effort and the expense, like something of a fraud, because in a meaningful sense, you are right to feel this. The education taught you to simulate understanding convincingly enough to pass the tests that were designed to measure the simulation, not the substance. Some part of you has always known the difference. None of this was your fault. Your brain worked perfectly before they began. Every child asks why endlessly, tests every claim, follows curiosity without needing permission, trusts nothing simply because an authority said so. Then school begins. And 12 years of systematic, patient, thorough training. Stop asking why, the teacher said so. Stop testing, trust the textbook. Stop following curiosity, focus on what will be examined. Replace thinking with performing. Replace understanding with obedience. By graduation, the natural thinking abilities have been replaced with performance behaviors that look like intelligence to anyone who does not know the difference. I refuse to let the system complete its work on me, though it punished me severely for the refusal. The failed exam, the rejected applications, the years of unemployment, the professors who dismissed me, the colleagues who found me insufferable for asking questions they considered already settled. In the end, I did not need their approval. I needed to understand how the universe worked. And I discovered that these two goals, seeking approval and seeking understanding, are not merely different, they are incompatible. You cannot fully pursue both. Every person who has ever thought something genuinely new has discovered this. I once wrote that it is, in fact, nothing short of a miracle that the modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled what I call the holy curiosity of inquiry. That this delicate little plant, beyond stimulation, needs above all else one thing: freedom. They gave you almost none of it, and what they left, they worked to eliminate. You do not need their credentials. You do not need their permission. You do not need their approval to begin thinking. You need to rebuild three things. Connection to reality. Do not accept a concept until you can state what it predicts in the world and how you could test it. Independent verification. Do not trust an authority until you can point to the evidence and name what would disprove it. Curiosity without permission. Practice asking the questions you were trained to silence and following them even when no one is grading you. These are not advanced techniques for exceptional people. These are the natural cognitive functions of every 5-year-old alive. Education trained them out of you with great patience and systematic thoroughness. I spent my life trying to hold on to what they tried to take. I was not always successful, but I understood early enough what was at stake. Now you do too. The institutions that rejected me spent the second half of the century giving me their most prestigious awards. I accepted them graciously, but I never once confused the award with the understanding that earned it. That confusion, the belief that the credential is the thinking, that the certificate is the knowledge, that the performance is the understanding, is the deepest and most lasting damage the system does. You can undo it, not by getting more credentials, by doing what you were doing naturally at 5 years old, before they told you to stop. Ask why, test the claim, follow the question. That is all it ever was.